in the name of the sequester, may the budget be balanced. Amen.
What's a sequester?
By Hillary Clinton, Jimmy. Don't you know anything about the stinking sequester?
No.
By definition, it's a cut in government spending.
Boy, Jimmy, you're a real spaz.
What kind of cuts, mister?
Some of the programs that may see some cuts include Head Start, public housing, military, and special education.
Pass the GOP's, Gamma.
Well, gee, what's the GOP?
The GOP, Jimmy, is actually the Republican Party. The Republican Party has 5 basic goals. Number 1, of course, is cut the deficit, and then cut entitlement spending, protect defense spending, and possibly increase it, even though we all know that didn't happen. And then simplify the tax code by cleaning out all deductions and loopholes. And then lower tax rate, even though the top 2% hardly pay any taxes. That's just a bunch of baloney.
Oh boy, this is real jazzing conversation. Let's talk about the Democratic side.
I think I can step in here, dear. See, the Democrats saw these cuts as the sequestration ensues, and they thought that they were kind of risky. But who wouldn't? I mean, it does restrict some pretty important programs. First of all, the cuts take a toll on our military. Their maintenance and training are just too darn difficult to uphold without a steady budget. The Air Force had to cut their entire flying budget in half. Along with this, we have homeless issues being brought into light because housing authorities are unable to provide vouchers because of these crazy cuts. As you can see, a lot of these are not very responsible. At least, that's what the Democrats see. How the Democrats see it. While Republicans continue to use these cuts as a tool to fix our broken economy, the Democrats point out just how harmful these cuts are to the nation.
Boy, those two are about as different as a tube sock and a spider monkey.
The Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction was supposed to make a plan to try to reduce the deficit. Joint committees are made up of Republicans and Democrats, so you can get input from both sides when trying to come up with ideas. They were trying to prevent the sovereign default that could have happened because of the 2011 debt ceiling crisis. They also made a plan for $917 billion in cuts and made steps for a plan to reduce the deficit by $1.5 trillion over a period of 10 years. They made plans to cut revenue increases, raise taxes, reform taxes, eliminate some tax breaks and loopholes, cut military spending, and slow the growth of entitlement programs like Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security.
What exactly do those gall-darn shucksters do in them committees?
Now watch your language, Mom.
I know what they do. It's the Budget Control Act.
Now, do you know why they created that act in the first place, Jimmy?
Well, actually, I do, Mr. Dad. The Budget Control Act was a piece of legislation that the Democrats and the Republicans both agreed to so spending limits could be made, but also figure out ways to increase the spending.
So what about the debt ceiling crisis? Did your dang Budget Control Act do anything for that?
In the Budget Control Act of 2011, it wasn't included in the sequestration till later on, and it did resolve the debt ceiling crisis. The bill set up a Congressional Debt Reduction Committee and included the sequestration as a financial disadvantage to only be used if Congress couldn't come to an agreement.
That blasted Congress.
Wow, little Jimmy, you're not a complete idiot after all.
Well, gee, thanks, Mr. Dad. Hey, do you think we can go play ball later because you're liking me now?
Don't push it, Jimmy.
So, little Jimmy, this Budget Control Act, what has it done?
Well, President Barack Obama signed it on August 2nd, 2011, and his plan had 3 main parts.
Can you even count to 3?
Don't encourage him, Mom. Of course I can. 1, 2.
Don't hurt yourself now. Anyways, continue on.
What are the 3 steps, Jimmy?
First, The debt ceiling is raised and caps are placed on discretionary programs. The House and the Senate Appropriations Committee are to figure out how to cut at least $840 billion from discretionary programs between 2012 and 2021. Secondly, a joint committee is charged with finding even more additional cuts. The 12-member committee was charged with identifying $1.5 trillion in additional deficit reduction over the next 10 years. On November 21st, 2011, the Super Committee announced it had failed to produce a plan that triggered automatic spending cuts in 2013 through 2021. The third step, working with across-the-board spending cuts. These spending cuts affect all non-exempt federal programs. They included $55 billion from defense, $38 billion from non-defense discretionary programs, $1 billion from Medicare, and $5 billion from mandatory programs.
What was that debt ceiling he was talking about, Daddy?
Well, little Eugene, the debt ceiling is a limit on how much money our government can borrow. It's been raised many times over the last century to help cover the increasing cost of our government's program. This is done so it doesn't default on loans. The current debt ceiling is around $16.7 trillion, and it was reached early January.
Well, what do the different parties want to do about it?
Well, a lot of things. The sequester kicked into effect when the ceiling was hit to give the government more spending money by cutting the spending in discretionary programs and putting the money into mandatory programs. This was proposed by President Obama, but was passed with the support of both parties in Congress. The Republicans widely believe that the debt ceiling shouldn't be raised again until a long-term solution is agreed upon, while some Democrats think that there shouldn't be a debt ceiling at all.
Well, they wouldn't have to fiddle around so much if they would just regulate their gosh darn spending.
Actually, Gabby, the government gives money to certain programs that aren't really necessary, and their budgets can be adjusted annually. This is called discretionary spending. Some of the programs that are in this category are conservation programs, veteran programs, and some education programs. There's a whole ton of more, though. These are programs that are usually cut first when the government wants to try and reduce their spending.
Well, still, they could have prevented this big old stinking mess if they weren't such knuckleheads.
Well, actually, Grandma, despite the fact that those members of Congress had 2 whole years to reach an agreeable compromise, they straight up couldn't. But they tried. After the committee formed from the Budget Control Act failed in November of 2011, this sequester seemed inevitable. Obama had several meetings with congressional leaders to suggest different options to avoid sequestration, which included both increased tax revenue, introduction of new taxes, and closing tax loopholes. Obama's proposal would have cut $85 billion, but the Republicans found this to be disagreeable. There was a little deadline which was supposed to force Congress into an agreement before January 2nd of 2013, and this was called the fiscal cliff. This was the day that cuts outlined in the sequester were supposed to take place. By the time January 2nd rolled around, no one had reached an agreement, but Congress successfully pushed the fiscal cliff to March 27th of 2013, an attempt to give Congress more time to sort this situation out. Commonly proposed tax increases would only affect the top 1% of wealthy Americans, and proposed cuts were aimed at the defense spending. None of these proposals were agreeable either. When March 27th came around, the sequester took effect, and harsh cuts were implemented.
That's just going to get things all riled up.
Keep in mind that the sequester was made to be as unappealing as possible so that both sides would work together to come to an agreement that was better than the sequester. These spending cuts are so disagreeable that economists predict that future economic impacts will be felt for a long while. It has been predicted that the economic downfalls of the sequester won't be felt immediately, though. But this doesn't mean we can rest easy. Just the opposite, in fact. Economists predict that this sequester will have the power to send our recovering American economy right back into recession, and the unemployment rate may rise up to as high as 9%. According to the Tax Policy Center, 75% of Americans can expect to see increased tax rate this year. Along with possible increased tax rates and the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs, the GDP is expected to decrease by 6% this year, if the cuts remain in place indefinitely. Workers who are furloughed will see smaller paychecks, and several more government workers will see a pay decrease of up to 20%. The full economic effects may not be felt until July, August, or even September of this year, but cuts will be made to frequently used programs like child care assistance, nutrition programs for single mothers, mental health services, and meal programs for seniors. The sequester will hurt everyone, whether you're on Capitol Hill or that hill over there.
You are such an oddball, Jimmy. This is a goopy situation. Half of the spending cuts each year will impact the Department of Defense, and the other half will affect the non-defense, also known as the domestic spending. Domestic spending will be reduced by $322 billion during these 8 years of the sequester, and $492 billion will be reduced in the defense spending. Many programs are being cut at least 5%. Some major cuts are being made by 9%. Or more are like military-related programs, public housing, primary and secondary education funded through Title I, Head Start, special education programs, energy efficient programs, refuge assistance, Medicare, National Institute Health Disaster, and many others.
Gammy.
Sorry, okay.
I heard Meals on Wheels too, Gammy. Ain't that a bite?
No! No! I need my six!
Don't have a cow, Gammy.
Anyways, Flutterbum, some programs are exempt, including Social Security, veteran programs, food stamps, low-income programs, foster care. Good thing for you, Jimmy. Pell Grants, Medicaid, and a few more. All of these programs are part of mandatory spending, which are exempt of the sequester. By the way, it counts for 64% of the budget. Means only 34% of the federal budget is actually being reduced.
Now I think it's about time you get out of here, Jimmy.
Yeah, I think so too.
You better leave. Your parents are pretty worried about you, I bet.
My parents
They don't even
don't
love him.
love me.
Jimmy, I think you should just go.
Just go.
You
Just
take
go.
him down, Jimmy.
Oh my gosh.
Dad.
It's about time.
Can I stay and play ball?
Go.
Get out the. Yeah. Okay.
Wow, Eugene, your friends are real weird.
Oh shucks.